Thanks for joining me. You're watching Notepad. Of course, this is the season for Hari Raya, but there's something else happening elsewhere right across the globe. I'm talking about Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference, or better known as WWDC. The event is Apple's annual meeting where developers can attend sessions and meet with over thousands of Apple engineers to learn, develop and better their developer skills. The 2019 event, which will take place on June the 3rd until 7th in San Jose, California, will include a first-day keynote event where Apple will introduce upcoming software and perhaps even some new hardware. Joining me is an extremely talented young man because he's the only Malaysian developer that has been receiving the WWDC grant. It's a very fantastic grant that we can speak of because last year about 6,000 developers attended WWDC, of which only 350 people right across the globe that got this scholarship. So he is one of those for this year. So that kind of shows you the more restrictedness or the exclusiveness of getting this grant. Stephen is a young Malaysian who is attending this year's event. So Stephen Tan grew up in the heart of Kuala Lumpur and is currently a student at Monash University under their highly regarded scholarship program. His submission to WWDC was created using the Scene Kit framework. We'll get to that in a bit, which explores the marriage between art and science. His work blends the two things that he is extremely very passionate about and examines the beautiful geometrical patterns created by the relative planetary positions. Stephen, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us. You are heading to San Jose in just a few weeks, in just a few days, and there's plenty to get into. Let's start with your relationship with Apple and with WWDC. How was it? How hard was it, or how difficult was it to get that scholarship to attend this event?
First of all, thanks so much for having me, Ibrahim. So I think the most difficult thing is about the conceptualizations of the idea, because the entire span, there were only 10 days for us from the first day until the submissions deadline. So I think the conceptualization was the most difficult part. But I think what Apple's looking for the most, in my opinion, is they want to look after your passion. So you need to have passions in your products, in your submissions, and then the Apple engineers will evaluate you based on your passions.
Which comes into this idea, right? Because your work that I mentioned just now, it examines the planetary positions of Venus and Earth in their orbits over time. Of course, this is just one of the many things that you can do as a developer, but Definitely. Why did you choose this idea over many other ideas?
The reasons I chose solar system was actually to commemorate the late Stephen Hawking. So it's actually not just a geometrical pattern that you can see. So over the span of 8 years, you will see the geometrical patterns formations between Earth and Venus. But at the same time, it also to encourage the kids, because it's designed for the kids to actually to let them to have the freedom and creativity in terms of how, because they can change not only between Venus and Earth, they can also change many possibilities between any other planets and any other links, and they can change between different orbital speed. So with that, they can use science to create arts in that sense.
And it's not just that, because augmented reality has been a big thing last year. I can only expect more things coming in from AR, VR this year. Do you think that the work that you do is going to be translated more into adoption of people taking into AR into their products?
Yes, definitely AR is one of the areas that we want to focus on, especially in education. So that one was for, the one that we say just now was for the WWDC 2019. So for 2018, I submitted using AR Kit as well. But it was about explorations of the simulations of solar system using AR Kits. So it's essentially allowed the kids to learn about abstract science concept with the use of bringing the entire solar system into their own room so they can actually learn about different orbital speed, what is the effect of mass of gravity. And those are some of the things that we are trying to achieve using AR Kits and Scene Kits, to trying to encourage the kids to learn more about science.
Okay, we'll jump right into the work that you are doing right now. There's this there's this framework that you use, which is Scene Kit.
Yes, right.
Could you explain to us a little bit more about what Scene Kit is?
On a very high level surface, Scene Kit is just about a very proprietary tool provided by Apple to facilitate the 3D renderings in iOS framework.
All right, and of course, Scene Kit comes together with AR Kit, with Measure Kit, and many others. Does this mean that this is a framework that developers can perhaps learn more when they go to WWDC in just a few days' time, and they can actually hone their skill better into learning how to use these kind of framework better?
Yeah, most definitely. So because they actually form a very cohesive package between AR Kit, Scene Kit. So when you actually attend the WWDC, you can speak directly with Apple engineers to actually find out if there's anything that you don't understand or you want to hone. So there's a very great place for you to actually understand deeper about the applications of a specific framework that you want to use.
So what happened last year in the keynote when Tim Cook went to explain a few key details, large numbers? We're talking about $100 billion in terms of revenue that has been gotten by App Store. Craig Federighi went on to explain a few products and services that are being offered. There are many other events that are taking place on top of this keynote that we speak of. I can only imagine the same thing happening this year. Can you tell us a little bit more about the experience that you went last year and perhaps how that would relate into what you kind of can expect going into this year's WWDC?
All right, sure. So I will not go too much into the technicals in terms of the WWDC because everyone can definitely watch that online, and I will encourage that as well. But what is different in terms of attending the WWDC is you are being able to not only in terms grow your technical skill set, but also being able to meet with some of the world's most passionate people and to be able to learn about their work and what motivates them. So it actually helps you to grow yourself as a software engineer as a whole, and not only in terms of growing as your technical skill set, but growing in terms of a software engineer. That's more important as attending the WWDC.
This is an extremely important note to make because you are an extremely privileged individual coming from the sense that you're the only Malaysian that has been receiving this scholarship. Do you feel that you have now a moral obligation to share what you have experienced, what you have learned with those that are around you, with the general public in Malaysia, to actually embrace a little bit more about development through Apple software and hardware?
Yeah, definitely. So we are trying to encourage more people to join these WWDC programs, and including attending the interview today to raise awareness. So there will be more Malaysians participating in this event because I believe for software developers, it's actually a very good platform for WWDC as a very good platform for us to actually hone our skill in terms of growing ourselves to take on the world. So I think it's a very good platform. So I'm trying to do more to actually encourage more people to join this.
Before we jump into the broader subject, there's still one more important question I want to ask you on a technical aspect. Swift language is a language that was pretty hyped up last year. Tim Cook keeps on saying that this is perhaps the programming language of the future.
Yes, right.
What's your take on Swift?
I think the thing with Swift is it's a very simple language, so you do not really have to have a very deep programming background. So it's very easy for you to, the learning curve is not as steep as you think that for other programming. So that's why at WWDC, or there are many programmers out there, they are maybe just 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old. That's actually because of the natures of Swift. It's easy for you to pick it up, easy to use. So that's one of the key points of Swift. So I think that's a very good thing for us to note, that it's easy for people to actually get started in Swift itself.
All right, Steve, we'll take a short break, but when we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more about the sole recipient of the WWDC Scholarship, Stephen Tan. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Perhaps you are eating ketupat and rendang at home. This is, after all, a merry period. Everybody's celebrating Raya. I'm in the studio with Stephen Tan, a very young, passionate Malaysian, going or heading towards San Jose, California, attending the WWDC. Stephen, the statement that has been recorded from you over the past few weeks is that you believe that technology is key to lifting people out of lifting people out of poverty, improving schooling, trying to ensure that young Malaysians are better equipped in trying to manage the future. And there is this notion that you feel that if you know programming, it's actually quite ubiquitous. Everybody is on the same level playing field in trying to build something together. It's just, the differentiation here is on how great your idea is and how well you execute those ideas. Do you feel that there is still some form of lacking of awareness in terms of Malaysian schooling system, in terms of trying to understand and embrace programming, particularly that of the iOS programming or learning Swift language or many of those elements?
What you say is definitely true, but what I believe is because...
I'm quoting you. Yeah.
Sorry?
I'm quoting you. Those are the
okay.
things.
Yeah, but what I think the most important thing here is because for us, our education system, I'm coming from a public school, so I know what kind of education system. It's very hard for us to actually get in touch or have the awareness in terms of programming and coding. Whereas when we compare to the more developed nations, when I actually got to meet like people from WWDC, so I compare like the very high level education system. So they got to in touch with programming at a very young age, whereas people for us in Malaysia, except for those who have very privileged backgrounds, most of us do not really have access to programming or computer science in general until we actually reach college or even high school. So I think that's one of the things that perhaps that we can actually work on that. And with regards to what you mentioned just now, with a lack of awareness, that's something that we can actually work on it. But
the conversation that I had with our programmer here in Astro AWANI, in fact, he was talking about the steps that we might miss if we start jumping straight into developer education in schooling. His argument is that there are so many steps needed before that, the precursor steps or the preliminary steps, including that of the familiarization of STEM subjects, the idea of logic, the idea of design, all that needs to be inculcated first before we jump into coding, before we jump into being an actual developer. But what's your take on this? Do you think that we should cover all the basics first before we jump into development, or do you think that everything can go in tandem?
In my opinion, I think what your engineers from Astro AWANI say is really true, because if we actually get it wrong at the first phase, I think it's very problematic. So what I would suggest, in my opinion, is actually perhaps we can start small, so it doesn't have to actually include everything, so it doesn't have to be compulsory, because if you make it compulsory, it's going to be, because we have so many schools, it's going to be hard to implement in terms of implementation. So what I think is perhaps you just start with the basic idea, basic concept, because when you start coding, it doesn't necessarily involve a lot of very deep computer science concepts. So we get the kids to actually in my opinion, get them to get interested into programming, and slowly we can introduce the deeper computer science knowledge if they're interested into. They can always pursue a degree in computer science or software engineering.
You know, let's talk a little bit about your upbringing, your life. You were mentioning briefly that you came from the public schooling system. How did you end up from where you are into, going to San Jose and meeting other world-class developers?
So I was from SPM and I went to STPM. And the reason why I was at Monash was because I received a scholarship to pursue in my software engineering in Monash. And during my studies in Monash, I got in touch and I got to know, because I was always interested in Apple's developments, but because of my family background, I couldn't really start programming until I was in college, university in Monash. So at the time when I started programming, I was trying to look for how I could actually improve my programming skill. And as I mentioned, because we do not really have a lot of, the environment is not very encouraging in terms of resources available. So I tried to look online and see, and I came across these WWDC scholarships. And one of the very good things I want to mention, for those who want to start programming in Swift, is there's actually an iTunes University library where you can actually take Stanford course on Swift free of charge. So that's the place where you can get started on learning Swift, and that's the place where I got started as well. And
is there any cost to it? Do you have to pay?
It's free of charge. It's available on iTunes U. So you just have to download the book. It's just like how you download an app. It's free of charge. Follow through the textbook. It's something like a textbook or reference book. And they will teach you very basic computer concepts as well as concepts in Swift. And that's where you get started.
Let's take a step back, right? I mean, developers are plenty, let's face it. But good developers are very hard to find. But that goes with any other job out there. There are plenty of, well, I guess, interviewers like me. But there's very rare good interviewers, right? It's the same thing everywhere. So the only differentiating factor between those that are good at what they do and those that just do what they do is the passion, the fact that they drive forward, the fact that they overcome all the other obstacles in order for them to just get it perfect. Do you believe that that is something that is lacking, at least in this part of the world? Or do you believe that there is some faith in the future of Malaysians in trying to get the best out of us?
I think regarding what you said just now, I think that's very true. And the thing you mentioned, there might be a lack of awareness. I think from my point of view, it's more to a lot of us, we do not really have a clear goal. So we are working on what we are working on. So it's like autopilots. So for my personally, I will always have a clear goal on what I want to achieve. So I think that would actually help you to, that's what drives you forward, because when you have a goal. So I think the reasons why most of the people, they do not actually might not have the drive is because they have not identified what they want to do in their life yet.
But of course, after Malaysia Baharu last year, we have one of the world's youngest, if not the world's youngest minister. We have plenty of young elected representatives. You know, Forbes 40, under 40 is just plainly 20s. They're not even 30s. There is a lot of facts that point towards some Malaysians having a clear goal into what they want. But in general, you have a feeling that Malaysians are still unclear or hazy about what they want out of their lives. How did you, like yourself, tell us your story. How did you come out from that rut? How did you manage to have a clarity in terms of that young man having a clear goal?
I think it's a lot of because of my family background. Because I grew up in a single parent family. So I needed to work like part-time and also I got to actually, like you mentioned just now, there's a fair share of resources in terms of competitions against the best. So that's how, the way I look at it is because I feel that a lot of the times, the world is unfair, we cannot blame anything. So, but the thing that we can make a change is trying to drive, to work as hard as we could. And the reason why I chose software engineering is because software engineering is a field that, you do not have any resources. You do not need to have any resources. You just need to know what you want to do, whether your product is the best or not, whether you are coming from very developed nations or maybe you're even coming from a developing nation, it doesn't matter. So I think that's what matters the most.
All right, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk more on technology with Stephen Tan. Welcome back. You're watching Notepad with me, Ibrahim Sani. Today we're talking about a scholar that is receiving the scholarship from WWDC. He's going to San Jose in just a few days, attending the big event at Apple. And of course, Stephen, being a very young man, it's extremely important for us to highlight that normally young individuals are rather optimistic, unlike me, who I don't declare myself as an old man, but I am, well, rather cautiously pessimistic about life, right? And there are things that are currently happening right now in the world of technology. Very recently, a few weeks ago, San Francisco, for instance, have just barred the city councillors from using facial recognition as a mode of identifier for law enforcement officers. 5G, while it is upon us, a lot of telco companies can't really execute that fast because of high capex costs, and that would inhibit the rollout from being done very fast or very quickly. There's accusation of privacy and how technology companies are actually invading our privacy outright. There are also companies like Apple, for instance, that defend the role of privacy. We've even seen the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, actually argued on an op-ed in the New York Times saying that privacy shouldn't be something that should be made just for the luxury good of people. It should be made available for all. Generally speaking, the themes that we're talking about is still revolving around how technology is now very much into our lives, into IoT. Now 5G is going to just embrace that, but privacy remains a big concern. How do you approach all these macro subjects in you doing your work? You may be just a developer today, but I'm not extremely sure that would be your end goal. I'm sure you want to do more later on in life. So please tell me.
Yes, correct. But like what you said just now, I think technology is just like a sword. So there's always two ways. So there's no black and white. It's just like a choose. So it's like a gun. You can use gun to protect people, or you can just use gun to kill people. So in my opinion, there's no right or wrong. It's just about the applications and how we use it. So I think we just have to be really careful in terms of how we use it, and we have to judge the pros and the cons in terms of privacy matters, in terms of how we use facial recognition, or even 5G, the latest security scandal. But we just have to look at the pros and cons, and there's always no black and white. It's always based on an evaluations of the situation. That's what I take.
The issue of privacy is a big matter in this part, or in the Western democracy. But in this part of the world, privacy is sometimes taken for granted. In fact, I did a quick Twitter poll. I know that's not the fairest way of doing, sentiment study, but, at least there is a gauge there. Amongst my followers, 75% says that they want to defend privacy. That's something that they still feel that they can do. And only 25% has given up on the idea of privacy. They think that that's it. They don't have any more control any longer. When you see 3 out of 4 people still want to defend privacy, how does that shape your work? I know, you were mentioning that, technology is just like a gun, whether you use it for good or bad. But I'm sure that must guide you into doing something more worthwhile, perhaps something that you can bring upon when you discuss with all the other developers in just a few days' time when you go to San Jose.
Yeah, that's also the reasons why actually attracted me to Apple's platform. Because let's say, for example, one of the example is Core ML, the machine learning platform. So that's the thing, a very high level to say it is because it's a different approach by Apple where the machine learning is being trained inside your phone. So you do not have to leave the data away from your phone to the internet cloud. So there's a different approach. So as a developer, in terms of approaching different subject matters, a lot of the times we are the one that actually make the decisions. So I believe developers have a very big responsibility in this, in making the right decisions, in choosing what platform they want to develop and what is their decisions, what is their policy they want to do, whether it is the right thing to do, because they will always be business people and you are, as a developer, you should know what is or what are the right things to do. So I think that's my opinion and my take on regarding privacy.
There's also a lot of issues on ethics because it's something that you're alluding to. The things that you do, it might be difficult for your colleagues or your compatriots to understand how you get it done. And therefore you have to take that bigger responsibility to ensure that everything is just safe, secure, private, works well, perhaps even commercially viable, ensuring that people are, enjoying the product. So many things that you got to consider. Are these some of the things that you think about when you want to head to WWDC this year?
Do you mean regarding the privacy matters?
Yeah, and all the other stuff.
Yeah, definitely, because when you are at the WWDC conference, you get to meet, like I mentioned, some of the people that are actually working on directly the framework itself. So that's the place where I got to understand, where we will get to actually understand better what is the underlying working frameworks and the workflow of the framework, the project. So WWDC is a very good place for us to really, because as you mentioned, we are the one that actually make the decisions to some extent. So we really need to understand our tools very well. So attending the WWDC, speaking with the engineers and the experienced developers is definitely a very good place for us to actually enhance ourselves with regard to what you mentioned.
Do you have any 1 or 2 things that you definitely want to do while you're there?
I would say the thing that I want to make the most is actually meeting more developers because during the WWDC they will be split into multiple sessions. So there will be the sessions, they call it sessions, and there will be labs where you actually get to meet many engineers and stuff. So I would place more emphasis on attending labs and speaking directly with the engineers that actually work on the platform, because that's where you actually get to learn the most about the technologies and also learn about how you actually can apply the technologies, whereas the sessions you will never be able to miss because it's always available online. So in terms of making the most of the WWDC is actually attending to labs and trying to speak to as many engineers as possible, and even those they are not engineers from Apple, there's still a lot for you to actually learn from them. Okay, my final question, we're running out of time. So, the quarterly reports of Apple shows that revenue from Asia Pacific minus China minus Japan is an extremely small number. We're talking about 4 or 5% compared to, say, Europe and America. It's like 20–30%. That signals 2 things. Apple is still growing in Asia Pacific, and that's one. Number 2, there's a lot of room to grow in this part of the world. Do you think that there's a lot of opportunities that lie ahead for you as a developer in this part of the world that you can build and grow in tandem with Apple's target of growing in this part of the world? I think that's true, but for me, in my opinion, is Apple has always have the growth in every part of the world. It's just not in Asia Pacific, but perhaps the growth might be a bit larger, perhaps like you mentioned. But for me, in my view, is that from my perspective is that, Ibrahim, because it doesn't only restricted to a specific regions, whereas it's actually actually you are actually able to compete against the world. So it doesn't only restrict to a specific regions. That's how I would look at it as app developers, because you don't serve the user of a specific regions, where you serve the user of a specific platform that you're working on.
Right, thank you, Stephen. That was Stephen Tan, a scholar from WWDC, heading there in just a few days, attending the event. Of course, WWDC is Apple's annual meeting where developers can attend sessions and meet with over thousands of Apple engineers to build and hone their skill. That's happening on June 3rd and until 7th in California. Here at Astro, we'll be covering the event also, so stay tuned to that. We'll probably drop some links down here somewhere on the short links about the event. And that's it from me for this particular episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks. It's my pleasure to have you.